Hello, today we're going to talk about wording in card games design and programming it in LUA. So at first, card games are popular today with games like Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, Hearthstone, and I wondered like some aspect of design as a game for them that I find interesting, and in particular wording. So I use several of those games that you might know or might not know. So Yu-Gi-Oh is a physical card game. TCG refers to the term everywhere except in Japan, and OCG refers to the version that is only in Japan. Magic the Gathering is one of the oldest. It's also a physical card game. Those two are the most popular because they have a wide variety of cards and their gameplay has reactivity, so you can answer your opponent, which is quite nice in a physical card game. Pokemon TCG, that is also a physical card game, but that is more simpler because there is no reactivity and the effects are quite simple, though the strategy is quite impressive. Cross Maga, it's a French online card game. It's a bit different because the board is quite exotic and it has no reactivity, and it's simple. And Hearthstone is an online card game, and this game is a bit more complicated. It has very interesting effects that occur at the same time, and has semi-reactivity with the use of secrets that trigger during your opponent's turn, but you can't choose when they occur. Now, so this was the introduction. So a card will interact with other cards, values, the field, or special mechanics, and to link them, you'll have to use words. And the thing is, it's very hard to design a way to make someone understand a very complex idea that might seem simple, like when you explain it, it's simple, but it's not simple. So for this video, I used various rulebooks. I've read articles, videos, conferences on wordings, advanced rulings, game design. And I also use the Yu-Gi-Oh! Project Ignis Discord to program cards and to get more information on rulings. So what I call a simple card game, like Cross Maga here, is simple effects, so effects that are like modify value, this costs less per something simple, like things that you can calculate very easily. And that have simple playtime, like the effects resolve in very simple steps, and they can have shortcuts. So it's a very simple thing that was invented by Magic, I think. So you can shorten a mechanic, a specific effect, with a keyword. For example, here we have the keyword Brotherhood. So I'll use this keyword as an example for the next slide. So target an enemy minion on the field, destroy minions with the same name in your opponent's deck. So obviously Brotherhood is not explained inside the game. You have to read forums to understand what it do or play the card. And so when you talk to a beginner, this definition is very simple, like, oh, there is an enemy minion in the field, I target it, I destroy minions with the same name in the opponent's deck. Now, so some things that people don't think about is, can minion be targeted? For example, in Hearthstone, there are some cards that can't be targeted by spells. So for example, can this card overlap things that say can't be targeted? And sometimes you'll find out that yes, even if it say cannot be targeted in Hearthstone, the thing is that it says cannot be targeted by spells. And in Yu-Gi-Oh! Otherwise you can have effects that bypass others. And this notion is unintuitive, because if you say this can't be targeted by card effects, and in certain ways you manage to make it be targeted, it's really counterintuitive. Yeah, also what happens if the minion says cannot be targeted by card effects? Like, okay, you target it and you destroy it, but can it be destroyed? Is it allowed? What if it says cannot be targeted, cannot be destroyed? What are you going to do? Do you still destroy the ones on your opponent's deck? You're not sure. For example, this is very common in Yu-Gi-Oh! That you have a card that says send this to the graveyard, and it says it cannot go to the graveyard by a card effect. And what do? Do you continue the effect, or do you stop the effect because it did not resolve the first effect? And also, who looks up in the opponent's deck to destroy it? Is it the opponent's player? Is it a computer? It is yourself, because obviously you don't get the same advantages. For the case of cross magath, in this case, it's a computer. But what if I say you look at your opponent's deck and send to the graveyard that card? Then you get a massive advantage, like a really impressive advantage, because you know the cards of your opponent. Also, if the opponents look at his own cards, it does not give you an advantage, and maybe they will cheat. They say, oh, I have only one copy of that, and they will remove it, and they will say, oh, I don't have others. Is it the computers? So maybe it can like have an impact on how you play. So for example, shuffling. So in modern days, like the fact that you shuffle a deck is intuitive, because else you would see your cards. So you shuffle by default, but you could also imagine a fact that you don't shuffle your cards after you've seen them, and it's actually a mechanic that could exist in the future. So when the computer does that, it can shuffle itself, so there is no problem with that. And in some games you have actually interaction with the top of your deck or the bottom of your deck, like in Yu-Gi-Oh!, in Hearthstone, and it's important like to think about these ideas, that maybe there are facts that happens and that you don't realize the impact that happens, that occur. Okay, now humans are computers. So with earlier I mentioned various games in which we have humans or computers. So we have original card games that are played without computers. So obviously you have to design its ruling to be playable by humans. So they have to have really clear rules, because else it makes it confusing. While with computers you can have very short effects, and you can simplify the wording, because it's the computer's work to interpret what's going on or not the humans. The humans can just play multiple games and then guess what it means later. For example, in Hearthstone, beginners, they play the card and then they get what it does, because it's intuitive. But if you tell someone to play with a physical copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Magic, they will not understand, because they have to guess what they have to read. They have to read the rule books. They have to be aware of what's happening. And obviously, even though you have simplified wording, sometimes it's more difficult to interpret what the computer will do in terms of order. And for example, here, so there is a new card in Hearthstone, well, new maybe a year ago or something, a card called Zephrys the Great that has battle cries. So when the card is summoned from the hand to the field normally, And if your deck has no duplicates, wish for the perfect card. Now you can ask yourself, what does the perfect card mean? Actually, so here you can see that on the bottom right, that it discovers, so it discovers the mechanic of Hearthstone. There are 3 cards. And actually, what happens with Zephyris, that was one of the cards that was the most complicated program, is that the perfect card analyzes first the computer analyzes some aspects of the board states and not others, in order to have symmetry in the information. For example, it does not read cards, it does not look at your hand. The board, it looks at stats but not effects, except certain effects like Doomsayer. And it can be confusing because you don't know what's inside that black box, you don't know how it calculates it. And in fact, it calculates based on a score. So it calculates the status of your current board state. Then it calculates the score of your board state after you play the card that is proposed, and then it calculates the score in the next turn. What could happen in the next turn? So it's interesting because you get a score based on multiple values that are very hard to calculate, and the programming of Zephyris makes it that it's very hard to decipher what it will offer, because you can't know the score of every card. So based on a limited set, the basic and classic cards, it gives 3 best choices based on this score. And I was looking at other streams earlier, and they say Zephyris Pega, so they mean that Zephyris is stupid because it does not offer a behavior that is good, so it's not the perfect card. But they seem to forget or to joke about it, but the fact that it does not read hand makes it very complex to see if there is lethal or not, so if you can win. And sometimes you get unpredictable behavior. So for example, I was looking at a setup in which he had a discard card and a Zephyris, and if he played the discard card first, he had the chance to the streamer had the chance to discard Zephyris. So the best play was to play Zephyris first, because you want to get damage, and then play the discard card so that you can maximize damage. So the thing is that sometimes it's not the perfect card, and it's difficult to foresee what's going to happen. And it's not. It can seem that it's just an odd card, but it's just an example to explain something. But it happens a lot actually. So we will see that a bit later. So for example, infinite loops. So in computer card games, infinite loops, they mostly have always a cap, and this cap is obviously not on the cards. For example, if you look at Defile, that reads, deal 1 damage to all minions, if any die, cast this again. Now the thing is, if this could go on an infinite loop, which is possible, the algorithm will run forever and you will just crash the game, which is bad. And that actually has happened in the past when there was several bugs. So you have, as a card designer, you have 3 choices. I noted only 3, but there might be more interesting. So first, you can prevent the player from playing the card. You can say, if it creates an infinite loop, then you can't play it, because it will result in a game state that would be non-ending. So you say no, you can't play it. And for computer CAD games, it's difficult to foresee when a loop is infinite, or if it's finite with a long period. For example, what if it's finite after 31 Defile? Maybe after, if Defile cast 31 times, it will be finite. So you can try and guess, and the thing is that for computer card games it's difficult to foresee that, but I think it's technically possible to imagine card games in which you prevent the player from playing the card. You can also cap the effect. So here Defile deals 30, so it will only cast in a finite amount, and you can also negate the effect before the because before the effect resolves. So you can say, oh, this will cause an infinite loop, therefore the effect does not happen, but you play the card. So the difference between 1 and 3 is that you play the card is not in your hand anymore, and this is more simple for some other card games because you just destroy when there is a problem, while in one you have to foresee what's going to happen. And in physical card games, so for the 3, it's actually quite nice to say, oh, this will cause an infinite loop, so we go back to the previous game state. And there is also something called the timing of effects in Hearthstone. So which effect triggers first? So it's a very wide subject because the cards follow an advanced rule book. For example, if you have Dr. Boom that says summon 2 1/1s, and Secret Trial if your opponent has at least 3 minions and plays another, destroy it. Imagine you have another minion here, and you play Dr. Boom, so you have 2 minions. Secret Trial will not trigger, and then the Dr. Boom effect will summon 2 1/1s, so you will have 1 from before plus Dr. Boom plus the 2 1/1, you will have 4, and Secret Trial will not trigger because the effect from the card happens after Secret Trial, and which is why its timing is important for the effects to know what's going to happen. And you might say, oh, that's just an example, a shitty example. You just have to remember that Battle Cry happens after the check for Secret Trial resolves. But in fact, all the cards in Hearthstone are hard-coded and follow the advanced rulebook. So this is a rulebook from the fan wiki, and they just playtested a lot, and they found that this was a ruling. So when you play a minion, you have a play phase, a battle cry phase, and an after play and after summon phase, and you have a lot of hard-coded cards, which is quite bad because like if you have to hard-code everything, it's not very clear, and the fact that the player have to do this is quite problematic because like you can't that means that you can't play Hearthstone with humans. Like if there is no machine, you can't play Hearthstone in theory. And for example, so this is what happens when you summon. The card is removed from your hand, the mana cost is paid, then there's a play phase, so in which the some effect that says when you play X do this, and then in the battle cry plays, and then there is an after play phase, and then check for win or loss. For example, if you play something that kills your opponent and then you play a battle cry that kills yourself, which is possible, then you will result in a draw. And these things are things that are not written. It's not written in the card game, which is problematic once again because it's the whole point of the video. Now, wording in workbooks. So here on the right you have examples of phases in Yu-Gi-Oh! So draw phase, standby phase, main phase 1, and then so during the draw phase you just draw a card. Certain effects says during the draw phase, at the end of your draw phase, you have a standby phase in which you do nothing. You have a main phase 1, and the main phase 1 you can play cards from your hand. The battle phase, the monsters can attack. When there is an attack, there are steps. So there is the start step, then the battle step. In the battle step there is a damage step, and then the end step. And then after the battle phase you have a main phase 2 in which you can also activate effects, certain effects, and then the end phase. So these are wordings that are from Konami, so from Yu-Gi-Oh! And they make things much clearer, so you know when you can activate things and not. And actually it's a whole part of the gameplay, and it's more intuitive to see, oh, this is going during the main phase. And actually if you go to a card shop and play with other, or go to a tournament, they will say beginning of draw phase, beginning of act phase, main phase 1, battle phase, I attack, I negate this and this. Because the thing is that there are so many effects that happen during certain phase. For example, if you activate your effect during the main phase 2 or during the end phase, for example a trap that you can activate whenever you want, it can be sometimes different if you activate it here or here or here or here, and it's quite important. For example, you might see some people that play their trap during their end phase because some card says during your own turn, and if you activate it during your opponent's draw phase, it can be negated by some effects. And Konami might say, oh, that's enough, people have enough rulings, but they soon realized that their phase system was not good enough, and that fan wordings became to exist. So when you have to describe a phenomenon or a ruling or an aspect, you have to use like certain terms that are not in the rulebook, but that define an advanced rulebook, as we've seen for Hearthstone earlier, and that allows them to understand certain complex problematic. Reactivity, so it's something that I mentioned earlier, is that some games don't need reactivity and don't need advanced timings. For example, if your effect, if you have only one effect, then one effect, then one effect, then one effect, and that they don't chain each other, like they don't have synergy, like I don't know if people get what I mean by reactivity, but it's kind of, can your opponent answer during your opponent's phase or something like that? And in Hearthstone it's actually not reactivity, because you play a secret and it's not like you choose or not to activate it, it's your opponent that chooses to activate it or not. In Yu-Gi-Oh! There is a complex system called chain link. So a player activates an effect, it's chain link 1, then the player can chain with a chain link 2, and then another can play a chain link 3, etc. And then the effects resolves backwards, so effect 3, effect 2, effect 1. For example, player 1 activates Raigeki, it's chain link 1. Player 2 activates Magic Jammer by discarding one card, it's chain link 2. The player 1 activates 7 tools of the bandits, it's chain link 3. And then no one has anything to answer, so they can't answer the chain link 3, like no one has cards, so they stop. And then the chain resolves backwards, so first chain link 3, it negates the activation of Magic Jammers and destroy it. So then the card is negated and sent to the graveyard. Then the chain link 2 resolves, but it has its activation negated. Sorry, it has its activation negated, so nothing happens. And then chain link 1 occurs and the effects resolves. Yeah. Now the concept of speed. So a concept that I find interesting is that it's something that's not written on the card, and that it's a fun term. It explains how fast a card is. For example, let's say all cards are at least all cards are at least spell speed 1. Some are spell speed 2, and some of them are spell speed 3. A spell speed 1 can start a chain, a spell speed 2 can answer a spell speed 1, and a spell speed 3 can answer a spell speed 2 and a spell speed 1. A spell speed 1 can't answer itself, like it can't answer another spell speed 1. A 2 can answer a 2 also, and a 3 can answer a 3 as well. So these concepts are interesting because none of these are parts of the cards. You can't find this on the card. And so let's say all cards are speed spell 1. Speed spell 2 are spell speed 2 are when it says this is a quick effect, or during either player's turn, or trap cards that by definition are that can be activated in general in either player's turn or things like that. And the spell speed 3 that are counter traps or certain cards, special cards that are spell speed 3. And that is useful for chain, and that makes it interesting. And once again, this is actually not at all a part of some things. And then you might ask, what happens if you have two spell speed 1 effects? So when you have two spell speed 1 effects, they trigger simultaneously and they start a chain. So for example, if you have one card that is a monster, well, we'll see in an example right below. For example, so first concept that I want to say is that the concept of limbo is a thing that occurs in Hearthstone, in Yu-Gi-Oh, probably also in Magic. So if a card reads, if this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, and that you negate its summon, so for example, if the monster summon is negated, so here it's Sengen, then it's not sent from the field to the graveyard. It's not sent from the end of the from the end to the graveyard. It's sent from neither. It's sent from a space that is called by fans it's called by fan limbo. So it's neither the hand, neither the play state. It's sent from the limbo to the graveyard, and so this effect will not resolve even though you physically played. You put the cards on the field. It does not go from the field to the graveyard because its effect was its summon was negated. So it's neither on the hand, neither on the field. Now, something I mentioned right before is that simultaneous effects go on a chain. It's called SIGOC, and so trigger and trigger light effects that will be activated at the same times are activated in following orders. For example, I have an example right below. So first the turned player's mandatory effect, then the non-player's mandatory effect, and so on. You can read. So here's an example. So if each player has a Sengen, so one from me, one on my opponent's side, and one Pitten the Dark Clown on me and my opponent's card. So Sengen is an effect that is mandatory, and Pitten the Dark Clown is an effect that is optional. And Dark Hole is a card that destroys all cards on the field, so they will all be sent to the graveyard at the same time, so simultaneously. But all of these are not special cards; they are all spell speed 1. So all these effects will result in a SIGOC, so simultaneous effects go on a chain, and the mandatory effects will play. So your Sengen will play first, then the opponent's Sengen, then the Pitten the Clown if you choose to activate it, and then your opponent's Pitten the Clown if they choose to activate it. And then if there are multiples, it's the player who decides in which order to activate them. So something that is interesting is that there are game states. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, you have two possibilities. Either the game state is closed, so if they want to do an action, for example, this card went to my graveyard, I can activate it. So you can't do anything you want, but you have binary choice, like more or less binary choice, in which you can choose yes or no, and that can be manifested in some other effects, like choose choose up to 2. So you can choose 1, you can choose 2, and this is still a closed effect, even though it's not a binary choice, because you are forced to do it. Then, if the state is open, the turn player can do anything they want. So it's open. Then during the chain, you start in a closed state, and then when the chain resolves, after it resolves, you go back to an open state. So this is from one of the old official rule book. So fast effect timings. So here you have an open game state. So either they do an action that does not start a chain. Does this activate a triggered effect? Yes, then you start a chain, because it's equivalent to activating a spell or a trap. If no, so for example, if it has no effects, then you can activate another fast effect. So for example, I play this monster that has no effect, then I chain with a spell that says when this is summoned, you can activate this. And that will create a chain that will be chain 1. And then you go to chain rules. And if you decide to pass, your opponent can activate a fast effect too. So if they see that you do summon something and that you don't do anything, they can answer. And then it goes to a chain rules. So this is all the chain mechanic that we've said, that it resolves backwards and that there are speed spells. And if you the turn player passes, then the opponent can activate fast effects. For example, that says during X activate this, or things like that. And then if both players agree to the move phase or step, then it's the end of the phase. So this happens for every single phase we've mentioned earlier. So all players must agree to go on this and this. But obviously, you don't have a prompt box that says, hey, do you want to go to the draw phase? Yes, I want to go to the draw phase. Do you want to go to the standby phase? Yes, I want to go to the standby phase, etc. It would be too confusing. So even in real life, they don't ask this. They just say draw phase, standby phase. Sometimes standby phase is skipped, but they say draw phase, main phase 1, I summon this, negated, and then battle phase, and then main phase 2, and then they mention end phase, so that the opponent knows that it's their turn and that it's their draw phase, and things like that. And it helps people to know when to activate these effects. So earlier I mentioned some infinite loops. So in Yu-Gi-Oh! I mentioned it in Hearthstone, so here in Yu-Gi-Oh! So there's a card called, well, no, first I will introduce the concept of loops that I did not define earlier. So a loop with a net change, so it's what I call a finite loop. So it has a loop that uses the same effects, but that has a net change when it resolves. But it's quite difficult to like guess. But for example, if you make your opponent draw a card, and that you loop this, so they will draw a card, 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 and then at the end of this loop, it will result in a net change, because they will be out of cards, and in Yu-Gi-Oh! If you can't draw a card and you're supposed to draw a card, you lose. So it's a net change. For example, if you increase the attack finitely, this can happen with certain loops in which you have to banish cards from your graveyard. Like for example, if you have 20 cards in your graveyard and you banish all of them, then there will be 20 iterations of this loop, and there will be a net change. But what people might think is infinite loop, so that kills, it actually this loop with net change that can be either finite or infinite. So this kind of loops is in Hearthstone it's not allowed, because you can't go with Defile that we've seen earlier infinitely. Like if it says, oh, if you kill your opponent after 60, then I go to 60, else it will go to 30. No, it's not like this that it works. So these loops with net change can be finite or infinite. Now, so you can also have some effects that involuntarily cause infinite loops. So when you are things that are caused by draw, for example, you are forced to draw, and if they said, oh, when you draw this, do this, and then it causes an infinite loop, it's actually possible. And the rule book has a special ruling for certain cards, like pole position in the top right corner. So it's a continuous trap card that says the face-up monsters with the highest attack on the field is unaffected by by the effects of spell cards. And when pole position is removed from the field, destroy the face-up monsters with the highest attack on the field. So when these kind of loops happen and that it's not your fault, the card is destroyed by card effects. Now you can also voluntarily cause infinite loop. In this case, the player is not allowed to play a card. For example, there is a combo that you can play with a pole position in which you can prevent your opponent from summoning any minion, any monster, because else it will cause an infinite loop. So they can't summon while pole position is on the field, because else it will cause an infinite loop, and then that means that they can't summon, which is quite good because you lock down your opponent. So, for example, if you have pole position, Luminous Spark, that is a continuous spell that gives plus 500 attack to light monster, and Gemini Health that has 1900 attack. If a player summons X head cannon, so light head 180 attack. X head cannon is summoned with the original attack, but since it's light, Luminous Spark activates, so it goes to 2300, and then X head cannon is then the one with the highest attack. So pole position made it be unaffected by spell cards. So then it goes back to its original attack, but then due to the fact that it's not covered anymore by pole position, then it's targeted by Luminous Spark, and then once again it goes on an infinite loop. So it's actually quite interesting, because you have those things that go infinitely. So the thing is that I wonder, what's going on when you program this card? So for Yu-Gi-Oh, there are different softwares, the official ones and the fan-made. So the thing for official ones is that they are not really quality, because, like, as some of the developers said, they learned the rules of the game while coding them. So I find it really strange. So I picked Project Ignis, which is an intuitive, a free Yu-Gi-Oh card game software game, and I say, let's code a card and let's see how it works with pole position. So let's go simple with Pot of Greed. So we might say, hey, Pot of Greed says draw 2 cards, but is it draw 2 cards? Because this is its code, so it's scripted in LUA. So first you have a script that gets its card and its ID. So all cards have an ID in the bottom left, so that's the value of ID, and S represents an object. So the initial effect is the one that occurs that when played. First, you have this structure here. When you have local, create effect with a E and the number of the effect. Then you have a bunch of things with E1, 2 dots and some things, some functions. And then you have C1, C, register effect, and then the name of this effect, and then N. Now, the thing is that for other effects to calculate, you have to assign certain amounts of flags. For example, if you have an effect that says when the player draws 2 cards, you need this to no. When a card effect is activated to make your opponent draw cards, then resolve this. So you need to have certain flags for certain cards. So the podal grid is in the category of category draw. It's an effect type activate because you activate it from the hand. It's not something that is continuous. And it has a target. So when I first read this property, is that it says that it's a flag player target. So it was counterintuitive because I thought, oh, if you target, it means that you select something, but when you draw 2 cards, you don't select anything. But the thing is that for Yu-Gi-Oh, you select yourself, and you select yourself to draw 2 cards, which is not at all what's written here. It's not written select yourself. This player draws 2 cards. It's not like this. And it's a free chain, so it does start a chain. And then you have 2 things like S target and S activate. So these are functions. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but here are the functions. So S target just gives information about the target. So the target is the turn player, so the one that's activated. TP means turn player, and the parameter for this target is to draw 2, and this will return in S target, so set target, and it will be in the category draw. Then, so these are all flags, and then when S activates, so when the effect resolves, so for the info of the chain, you draw with these settings. So the turn player draws 2 cards, and it results here. So dual.draw, and then you get the chain info target player, that is P, and the chain info target param, so 2, the value 2, that goes here, and reason effect. The reason for this is that if in the chain, for example, I play pot of grid, then I chain a trap card that says, oh, if you want to draw 2, then instead draw 3. So this will not be 2. So first the value of this will be assigned to 2. Then in the chain they will say, oh no, instead it's 3, and the get chain info will be changed between this and this. So the value here will draw actually 3 cards. So it was rather a simple effect, like draw 2 cards. It can be simple. What did I write? Yeah, I put a bit of comments. So now pole position. So the first effect is that it is an effect type activate, because it's a continuous spell card, continuous trap card, sorry. So when it's face down, you have to activate it first, so like a trap. So it seems rather simple, because you have something that activates, that creates a chain here, and okay, that creates something, and then it creates a group. So the thing is that this card is so complicated, it has so much extra ruling, that you must create a variable for groups, and this variable will be called G. Now for the second effect, we'll create a field type effect that will say effect that ignore immune, and this event will adjust. So it's really important that it's not a fixed event and that will always be renewed by this set label object G that is dynamic, because you change it again. You change it again and again and again. And to do this, you will apply the set operation s.adjustTop. Adjust up. Then you say the location. So the location of this is when it's in the spell zone. Yes, yeah. So the s.adjustTop is when you have, if this card is face up in the monster zone, you check for the cards in the monster zone. So wait. Yeah, while if you have cards that are face up on the turn player, checks for things that are on the monster zone. Now you will do a check to see which card has the max attack, because as you can see, the effect reads the face-up monsters with the highest attack on the field is unaffected by card effect. So if you have multiple, you have to have a group, dynamic, G. So if the number of G is superior to 0, so if it would be equal to 0, it would be either that it's not correctly initialized, or if there is no monster on the field, because if you check for monsters that are face-up on the field, it should be 0. Now, so you get the group that maximizes the value get attack, so card get attack, and then you will update what's going on, and you will merge with the new values. So this is just a merge thing that will say, oh, if previously I had 2 monsters and now I have 1 monster with the highest attack, then I changed my group of activation, because you will not negate the effect of things that are not anymore on the field. So then triggers the adjust instantly, and then it read adjust. So these are things that are programmed hardly, and they activate. Now the third effect is that it's a field effect. So we've defined G earlier, but we've actually never defined the fact that is unaffected by card effect. The things that we did earlier is the face-off monster with the highest attack. The first effect was to target this, to target this thing. It was effect 2. Now effect 3 will be it's unaffected by unaffected by any spell cards. So you will locate monster and give them immunity to the target, and target that have a certain filter, and then of the object G. So G, we said earlier, it's the dynamic group, and if you active, so the active type is spell. So if a spell is activated, it will go through this filter and give immunity to the target. Now effect 4. Effect 4 is what is it? It's a if it leaves field, so it's the last part. So if it's removed from the field, you destroy the one with the highest attack. Wait, no, it's, I think the two of them. So here you have a Boolean variable that sets labels here. So it's an effect that you cannot disable, like you can't chain this effect. And here it will check for monster zone So if the dynamic group G will be destroyed by reason effect. So there are certain reasons when an effect is called, and we call them reasons. So once again, it's not a term by the official rulings, but we give a reason to why certain effects happen. And here it will be set, oh, it's destroyed by the effect of this card. Then I asked myself, okay, so I was talking about game design. I say, let's design a card. So I chose the Crystal Beast archetypes. So they have a particular thing that interests me, is that they are monsters, but then when they die, they go to the spell zone and they have certain effects that can activate. And they have synergy with Rainbow Dragon or Rainbow Dark Dragon. So I chose to create one called Crystal Beast Obsidian Koala. So the structure is that there is a crystal, and then there is an animal or a beast or whatever, and there is no dash. I realized way later that there is no dash in Crystal Beast. I don't know why I imagined that. And I needed some other tool like CDB to do card database to input like attack, defense, things like that. So this is what a card database look like. So you set certain archetype by integer values. So you have a file in which you have values for certain archetypes. For example, this Crystal Beast will go in the Crystal Beast archetype. Rule, you can assign if it's allowed or not. The attributes, so these are Yu-Gi-Oh things and not really interesting. Okay, so then I say, so let's design effects. So I chose 3 effects. On this picture there is an older version of this. So first I designed 3 effects in my head. So when this card is summoned, you can add 1 Ultimate Crystal, or 1 Ancient City, Rainbow Runes, or 1 Advanced Dark from your deck to your hand. This effect can be used only once per turn. So this is an effect that is properly worded, and you can see that it has its limitation of this effect can be only used once per turn. Once per turn. And something I haven't mentioned is the when, so I will mention later. So the thing is that this is an effect that is valuable and that search from the deck, and that kind of makes sense, so I say it's interesting. The second effect is a continuous effect, so while this card is face up on the field, you take no damage involving Crystal Beast or Ultimate Crystal monsters you control. And what's interesting is that when this goes to the spell zone, it's still active. And then here, if this face-up card is destroyed while it's in the monster zone, you can place it face-up on your spell and trap card zone as a continuous spell card instead of sending it to the graveyard. So this is the main Crystal Beast effects. So yeah, I realized some modification. Like for example, this effect can be used only once per turn. I realized that it's better to say you can only use this effect of Crystal Beast Obsidian Koala. So the thing is that when you play multiple cards with the same name, they can stack and make it very OP. So when you have this effect, it's better to specify the card, and it's really a small modification. The second modification is in the comma. So earlier I put a comma, but I explained why that I put a semicolon, and the rest stayed like as it is. So I designed a card with a level, an attack, type. So in Yu-Gi-Oh, very old wording were confusing, and they decided to make something uniform, starting in 2010, 2011, what they call problem solving card text, PSCT. So they gave rules about wordings to give rules. So this is complicated. This means that there are implicit, well, there are extra rulings that applies to certain words. And actually this is quite nice, because some effects were too confusing or can be ambiguous. So for example, some aspect of the PSCT is that if it has a colon or a semicolon, it starts a chain. So like a spell card, but else it doesn't, like a monster with no effect. Like a monster with no effect does not start a chain. So for example, if a monster does not start a chain, you can't like say that you can't be in the chain physics, like chain mechanics. The text before the colon is an activation requirement, not a comma. So when you have specific activation requirement rulings that goes with that, you can also have the difference between that target and those targets that indicate that targets must still meet the target requirements at resolution to be affected. For example, if they are not here anymore, then they do not resolve. And if they say it or they, them, it means that the targets do not need to be there to meet the requirements. So there are some other disambiguation between activate and use. For example, you can only activate this card once per duel, means that it can be activated again if the activation is negated, which is not the case for use. So you see that there are lots of rules that go with the cards, and for example, the when resolves after a card effect resolves after a card effect that happened last, and if happens every time. So I'll give an example. No, I'll give. Wait. Okay, I put my example right below. So conjunctive. Something that I didn't say is that when you have two effects that are linked, you can put many conjunctive, like also, then, and. But the thing is that they have different meanings. So they can either resolve simultaneously, so that they are done exactly at the same time, and sometimes it go into segok, and or sequentially. In this case, they go on a chain, sequentially, like this resolve, then this resolve, and then here you have the axis of is A or B required. So if you have A imply B, if it's neither, it means that if A is not here, you can still do the B. For example, if you do draw one card, also after that do B, and if you didn't draw the card by card effect, then B will still occur. And if you have simultaneous effect, if the if B is not if B is not activated, then A will not resolve. Yes, that's right. If if you have draw one card, then destroy a minion. If you can't destroy a minion, then you don't draw one card. So in this column, and you see that you get different wording that go in the conjunctive. Now I'll give an example for that. So here you have a trap card called Torrential Tribute that says when a monster is summoned, destroy all monsters on the field. You have a monster that says when you control, when this card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can special summon some things like that. So the important thing to notice here is the when. when this card you control is destroyed by battle, and not if. That's the difference. And you have Mystical Space Typhoon that says target one spell trap on the field, destroy that target. Notice how Mystical Space Typhoon does not say cancel the effect or negate the effect or something like this. So one thing that people could do is that when the opponent summons this guy, they will play Torrential Tribute, and the effects of this will be triggered because you have a when effect, so it will trigger. Now, if you want to negate that effect, you can activate Torrential Tribute, then you can chain with a quick effect. So the spell cards that have this icon can be spell speed 2, so you have spell speed 2 that start a chain, so you have chain 1, and you chain with a magic card, spell card that has spell speed 2 that go on chain 2, and then you target Torrential Tribute. So you say, I want to destroy my tribute. That can be weird, because we've seen earlier that it resolves backwards. So first, the thing that will resolve is that Mystical Space Typhoon will destroy Torrential Tribute. So this will go to the grain. But the chain is not ended. Torrential Tribute is still making an effect. So you will activate Torrential Tribute, and this will just destroy Suani, and it will activate its effect. Now, if you activate Mystical Space Typhoon to destroy your Torrential Tribute, then you activate Torrential Tribute. The chain link will be 1 because you activated this one first, then this one. So the first one that will resolve is that it will destroy this card, and then Mystical Space Typhoon will destroy this card. So when it will resolves, since you have this when effect, and you have an effect that happens after the when effect, after the effect that triggers the condition, the activation requirement, that is Mystical Space Typhoon. So destroyed, then another effect happens. So when needs to be the last effect that happened, while if does not need to be the last effect. If this has a if instead of when, the combo that to do Mystical Space Typhoon on your own Torrential Tribute, then to activate Torrential Tribute to destroy this, to negate its effect, is possible. If it's not possible. Now let's give an example in Magic. So I looked some other games. Pokemon is really plain, so it's pretty straightforward. But Magic has some interesting things, like you may or may not. So if you have a certain card that activate between the time in which you targeted. So this is a spell card that says target creature and it fights. Here it says you may have it to fight target creature, but the may here is very important because you can choose not to if an effect is chained. For example, if you do this and an opponent gives more attack to his opponent, to his own minion, then it might be at a disadvantage if you play Prey Upon. But if you play Somber World's tag, and then the opponent plays a card, you can choose to not do the attack. Wait, why did I put this right here? Okay, I wanted to talk about that. I don't know where exactly I wanted to go here. So I have my card, and I decided, oh, let's make it in. So in my card, so here I have a when. I decided to keep the when because it means that it can miss the timing. So here, if so in the case in which Mystical Space Typhoon is activated first, then you chain linked with Torrential Tribute. This resolves first, this destroys this, then the Mystical Space Typhoon will resolve, and we will say that this effect missed the timing because the timing of this has happened too late compared to the mystical space typhoon that occurs after this, because you can't chain this effect to a mystical space typhoon. So here we have an activation requirement with a when, which means that if I summon it and by some effect, like he does, the opponent activates an effect, then this effect will not resolve because it's a when. I can want something. You can use only this. You can only use this effect of Crystal Beast once per turn, which is fine. While this card is face up on the field, you take no battle damage involving Crystal Beast. Okay, so I've read that already. Now let's make a Yu-Gi-Oh card. So I said, okay, let's make a Yu-Gi-Oh card and try to code it and try to understand certain mechanics. So I used a lot of data from the Discord and from other cards that I managed to get the LUA scripts from it to try to copy an effect. For example, the Crystal Beasts are, you need to copy paste the effects basically. So it's important to design a card on paper and ask for feedbacks, because I did not design it alone, because people have very instinctive and pertinent feedbacks. We made it a card on card database, so you can play test live. So the .cd makes it be recognized by Project Ignis, and then you create a file called c111.lua, and you put it on Ignis, and then you can play the card on Ignis. And obviously you take reference from other cards to copy certain effects. So the effect 1. When this card is summoned, you can add one Ultimate Crystal monster, one Ancient City Rainbow Runes, or one Advanced Dark from your deck to your hand. You can use only okay. So this was my effect E1. So I created an effect. So I put the description effect to the ID. So this is just for the user interface that will say, oh, what effects occurs? It's the effect of that card. So this picks the line, so the text for a certain ID. So it will the description of this effect will be the name card, so Crystal Beast Obsidian Core. So it's just a flag, a regular flag. So it's the category is category to end plus category search, because you add something to end, and it's also search because you can target this search. The type is an effect type trigger O, because you can trigger it. So it's when you it's a you can, it's not add, it's you can, so it's not mandatory, and it's an effect type single, so it's not a field effect. And this happens when you summon on success, and you put a count limit to 1, because once again we said you can only use this effect of Crystal Beast once per turn. Now the set target, I put it in the TG function, and the operation I put it in the OP function, and I register the effect E1. When this card is okay, so here I put the first function I did for this effect is a search filter. So it's the filter to check for this. So this is an archetype. Archetype have integer values that you can find on certain text files. So is set card, so is a certain card part of the set of Ultimate Crystal, which has this index and is a monster, or exactly this card that has this ID, or exactly this card that is this one, and is able to get to end. So this is just a check in order to see if you can get it to hand. So this is a filter, as we've seen earlier, that sometimes they need to have a filter. So for the target, I check if there are cards in the deck that meets the requirement, because else, if there are no targets, you don't activate it. Now, then you will say that the operation info will be to add to end a 1 to the player from the deck. So this is a flag, this is a filter, and here we have a hint, so it's a user interface thing, and the effect that will happen is to select a matching card using the filter from my deck, from the turn player from the deck. So the turn player checks for a card from the turn player's deck, and if there are more than 0 cards, so if the set G of cards that match this, so if there are cards that you can get, you can send them to end, and then you ask your opponent to confirm. So here the turn player is a Boolean variable, so it's 0, 1, and you want confirm cards means that you want the player of the first argument to look at the cards G. So since I want my opponent to do this, it's the opposite of the turn player, so it's 1 minus the turn player, because 1 minus 0 is 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0, so it's the opponent player. It's the negation. And then you have G, so the opponents look at the card G. And now you might say, oh, the effect is finished, you finished the effect. Well, you forgot one thing, that in Yu-Gi-Oh! There are multiple ways to summon a card. There is by normal summon, special summon, flip summon. So fortunately there is a very convenient function to clone. So E2 is the clone of E1, but it triggers when you special summon, and E3 is the clone but for flip summon. So now with effects 1, 2, and 3, we have programmed the first effects in our cards. Of course, we need to specify that the card itself can be searched as a crystal beast, so we don't forget to put it as being part of that archetype. So we put it in s.listSeries 0. Something. So this is an integer that refers to the crystal beast archetype. Now the effect 2. While this card is face up on the field, you take no damage involving Crystal Beast or Ultimate Crystal monster you control. So it's an effect type field, so it happens always. I don't understand exactly why you need to put a 1, but apparently you do. So the effect is that you avoid battle damage on the field, and it targets only location monster zone, so on the monster zone, and you need to go to the condition. So we'll go to the condition. This is what my condition looks like. So it goes for if the get handler, so if the current card, so the Crystal Beast Obsidian Koala, is face up, so this represents the card was the effect we're programming, so the koala is face up, and is either from a Crystal Beast archetype or from the Ultimate Crystal archetype. So I did not put U control, but since it's from my player, apparently it works. Maybe I should have put something for U control, because if my opponent controls it, I don't take damage either. So maybe I misprogrammed this part, but it's not really important. It's just a test to show some effects. So effect 3, if this face-up card is destroyed while it is in the monster card zone, you can place it face-up in your spell and trap card zone as a continuous spell card instead of sending it to graveyard. The thing is that it's a common effect of Crystal Beasts, and this effect defies threatens the whole rulings, because you're not allowed to put cards like this that are not equipped cards or things like that for nothing. But this is a special effect, like something that has a special ruling for it. So I just copy pasted from another Crystal Beast. So it's an effect single, it's an effect to grave redirect, since instead of being destroyed, it is redirected to go to the spell and trap card zone, and it's CB for Crystal Beast, so it's a special effect. It's an effect dedicated to this, and it's an uncopyable, so you can't copy this effect from other things. So the condition is rep condition and operation is rep operation. So the rep con is just a filter. So if the card is face up and is in the monster zone and is destroyed, that makes sense. And then the operation is that it will change the type to be it will change the type to be able to go to the spell and trap zone, spell and trap card zone. It's an effect single, so it's not a field effect, and it's something that you cannot disable. Set reset, like it's too much in detail. The set value, so it's considered as a spell and a continuous spell. Then the new effect, so the fifth effect that goes into operation of fourth effect. Of the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, the fifth effect is redefined here, and it's actually a constant. It's actually a special effect that has raise event. It's a special event, so it has a certain code with like some values. Okay, so this is what it looks like in my deck. So I made a special deck with the anime, and it works quite well, but it's not strong, but it's okay, and I can play it. So this is my card, and it's interesting. It's very interesting to design card, to think about the wordings, how to design it. So my conclusion is it's very important to have very precise ruling about timing, effect resolution, infinite loops, to have very clear phases so that it's well defined, that you can predict what's going to happen. So yeah, and that it's not confusing. So one thing that is not obvious is that card text don't have to show everything. As we've seen many times, it's not because it's not on the text that it does not do it. And it's not because it's not stated in the rules that it does not do it. So it's confusing, I know, but sometimes if you are a card game designer, maybe it's better to have less on your card, and maybe have a special sheet ruling for this card that can be interesting. But once again, it have to be not ambiguous and work well. So yeah, it has to be clear. I mean, if you put too much words, it will be too wordy. For example, if the effect of pole position that destroys itself when it goes into an infinite loop would be written on it, it would be way too long. Like you have to explain, if this effect goes into an infinite loop that causes no net change, then destroy this face-up card. Yeah, that will be exactly what's going to be shown. And card text don't have to show everything, but you have to be able to understand it. And maybe if you design a non-line card game like Hearthstone or Cross Maga, it might be interesting to have to be able to predict what's going to happen. For example, what's going on with Zephyrus, with the fact that you can't calculate the score, is very confusing. And certain effects, like if you Google Hearthstone Mythbuster or Hearthstone Mathematics or things like that, in which certain aspects of the games, like what triggers first, are put on the spot, you might see that maybe it's simple, maybe it's not simple, maybe the cases in which it's problematic are too rare. Like for example, there are cards that don't have any problem except when you put it in a special combo. So yeah, it's very complicated, and I hope this video was interesting somehow. If you have any question, ask in the comments. Anything. Goodbye.